I used to think that if you had access to the royal vaults, you could simply wear whatever you liked. The largest diamonds, the most elaborate tiaras, all of it, whenever you wished. But the reality is far more restrained. The women who have access to everything are often the most selective in what they choose to wear. Some of the most remarkable pieces remain untouched for decades. Not hidden, not forgotten, simply left aside. And when you begin to ask why, you realize that these choices are rarely about access. They are shaped by time, memory, and a very quiet sense of tact. And once you start noticing it, you begin to see it everywhere. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. Sometimes, a jewel reaches its owner at entirely the wrong moment. The Cartier Halo Tiara is a perfect example. The Duke of York purchased it in 1936, just days before King Edward VIII's abdication. His wife, the future Queen Elizabeth, managed to wear this delicate scroll tiara a couple of times, but almost immediately her husband became king. As queen consort, she suddenly required much grander, more substantial pieces, and the halo tiara was set aside. Years later, a very similar situation happened with her daughter. The tiara was given to young Princess Elizabeth for her 18th birthday in 1944. It was the middle of the war, strict austerity measures were in place, and there were no gala receptions. By the time peacetime resumed, Elizabeth was already on the verge of ascending the throne herself. Once again, the tiara proved too modest for a reigning monarch. Princess Elizabeth never wore her birthday gift in public. Instead, she found a wonderful practical use for it, turning it into the perfect starter tiara for the younger royal women. She lent it to her sister, Princess Margaret, then to her daughter, Princess Anne, and decades later, it was worn by Catherine Middleton as she walked down the aisle at Westminster Abbey. Time shifts not only the required scale of jewelry, but also fashion itself, sometimes quite ruthlessly. At the turn of the 20th century, Edwardian ladies favored high diamond chokers worn tightly around the neck. In 1901, the then Princess of Wales, the future Queen Mary, commissioned the Love Trophy collar. The jewelers used stones from family reserves, diamond stars from her mother and grandmother, as well as a brooch from her aunt. The choker featured 7 panels with motifs of a bow, a quiver, a torch, and laurel wreaths. 3 years later, Queen Alexandra commissioned her own choker from Cartier, the Collier Rasil. It was a diamond fishnet design suspending cabochon emerald and ruby drops, given to her by Indian Maharajas. Queen Mary eventually inherited her mother-in-law's choker, replaced the colored stones with diamonds, and wore both pieces for a time. After the First World War, however, this stiff, high-necked silhouette suddenly vanished. It is fascinating to observe how items of incredible value do not get dismantled or lost. They simply stop being needed. Both chokers survived perfectly intact. They were passed down to the Queen Mother in the 1930s and then to Queen Elizabeth II in 2002. They have been resting in the dark vaults for decades, though the Love Trophy collar was photographed for a book in 2012. More recently, the Love Trophy collar was taken out of the vault for the Edwardians Age of Elegance exhibition at the King's Gallery in 2025. I often look at these elegant, elongating shapes and think about what a styling challenge they present today, yet how beautifully one of them might sit on the long neck of the Princess of Wales. Occasionally, an entire era and its strict customs fade away, taking its jewels with it. Following the death of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria dressed strictly in widow's weeds. Heavy black velvet and the long white veil of a widow's cap were entirely incompatible with the massive imperial state crown, which was also physically exhausting for her to balance. In 1870, the jewelry house Gerard created the small diamond crown for her. The jewelers used diamonds from the Queen's personal necklace, as well as stones from a fringe ornament made in 1856. Standing just 9.9 centimeters tall and weighing around 160 grams, it featured an openwork silver frame supporting 4 crosses pâté and 4 fleurs-de-lis, set with 1,187 diamonds. Victoria wore it perched directly on top of her widow's cap. This silhouette became so recognizable that this tiny crown was placed on her coffin after her passing. Queen Alexandra did wear this small crown a few times for the state opening of Parliament, pairing it with standard royal regalia rather than mourning wear. However, the specific tradition of wearing those elaborate widow's caps and the aesthetic that made this tiny crown make sense eventually vanished entirely from society. Without that context, the crown simply had no practical application in the wardrobes of the new queens. In 1937, King George VI deposited it in the Jewel House at the Tower of London, where it remains on display with the rest of the regalia. This is where the pattern becomes clearer. Time can set a jewel aside, but sometimes the decision is far more deliberate. And nowhere is that more visible than in a collection where everything is equally available. It is a curious paradox. When you have absolute access to everything, the choices you make become infinitely stricter. When we look at the British royal collection, we often see jewelry bound by rigid personal inheritance. The Dutch royal family handles their treasures quite differently. In the 1960s, Queen Juliana placed the family jewels into a foundation, meaning that when a new Dutch queen takes the throne, she essentially receives the keys to a vast, shared vault. With every tiara available to her, the decision to leave certain pieces completely untouched reveals a great deal. The Stuart diamond tiara is perhaps the most imposing example of this dynamic. At its center sits the Stuart diamond, a remarkably rare 39.75 carat rose-cut stone with a sea blue tint. It has a restless history, passing from King William III and Queen Mary II in the late 17th century, surviving exile, and eventually returning to the Netherlands. Its modern life truly began in 1897, when Queen Emma commissioned a massive, towering structure of open-work scrolls to showcase the historic stone. For decades, this grand piece was the definitive signature of Queen Juliana. After her inauguration in 1948, she wore it consistently, taking it on state visits across Europe right up until 1972. The tiara simply became synonymous with her presence. Then, Queen Beatrix ascended the throne in 1980. Over her 33-year reign, the grandest tiara in the vault completely vanished from public view. There were persistent rumors that the massive platinum structure was simply too heavy and caused severe headaches. While the physical weight of the jewel provides a very practical reason to leave it in the safe, stepping away from the Stuart tiara also allowed the new queen to move completely out of her mother's visual shadow. She needed a silhouette that belonged entirely to her. It is a quiet but powerful decision, not to reject a jewel, but to refuse to be visually defined by it. Beatrix found her signature in a completely different piece, the Württemberg ornate pearl tiara. Originally linked to a piece made in 1839 for Queen Sophie, it features an intricate diamond design of scrolls and fleur-de-lis, topped with natural pear-shaped pearls. Queen Juliana had worn it only a handful of times, meaning it was free of strong, immediate associations. Beatrix selected its absolute grandest configuration, with all 11 upright pearls attached, for her wedding to Klaus von Amsberg in 1966. The embroidery on her wedding dress even echoed its scroll motifs. The tiara is highly versatile, allowing for at least 4 different settings depending on the number of drop pearls attached. Throughout her reign, Beatrix wore it constantly. She usually preferred the simpler form without the pearl toppers for regular state events, reserving the full version for rare occasions like the 1982 state visit to the UK. She found the exact shape in which she felt most confident, and she continues to wear it even after her abdication. And this is where it becomes almost cyclical. Each new queen inherits the same vault, but never the same choices. The cycle naturally shifted again with the next generation. Queen Maxima had to navigate this exact same vault when King Willem Alexander ascended the throne. She has approached her mother-in-law's legacy with clear caution, wearing the Württemberg tiara only 4 times since 2013, mostly in its more restrained settings. Instead, Maxima focused her attention on the deeper archives. In May 2018, during a state visit to Luxembourg, she brought out the Stuart tiara, a piece unseen in public for decades. She introduced it carefully, wearing a smaller, lower version without the massive central diamond. A few months later, at a state banquet at Buckingham Palace, she debuted the tiara in its complete, towering form, with the Stuart diamond proudly in place. Reaching back to a historic piece that had skipped an entire generation is an interesting strategy. It shows how selecting a piece of jewelry from a shared family vault is a subtle way to draw your own boundaries. Staying with the Dutch royal collection for a moment, it is fascinating to see what happens to jewels that simply fail to resonate with their owners. Some pieces do not just skip a single generation, they sit in the dark for over a century. In 1888, the Dutch court ordered a rather unique piece from the French jeweler Malario, a sunbeam tiara set with white and brown diamonds, designed to be worn interchangeably as a necklace. Despite its elegant, radiating silhouette, it somehow never found favor with the women of the family. Queen Emma, Queen Wilhelmina, Queen Juliana, and Queen Beatrix all had full access to it, yet none of them wore this piece publicly. It seemed destined to remain a permanent resident of the vault. This made its sudden reappearance entirely unexpected. On her wedding day, Princess Mabel stepped out wearing this exact, mysterious Malario tiara. Royal watchers were astonished, trying to figure out where this sparkling sunbeam design had come from, as it had never been part of the recognized royal rotation. It was a beautiful revival, though a brief one. Maxima wore the sunbeam tiara a couple of times back in 2006, long before she became queen. Today, as a reigning consort, she generally prefers the much larger, more imposing forms available in the family foundation. After its brief moment in the light, the tiara quietly returned to the shelves. Until now, these choices have felt almost practical, shaped by time, taste, or personal identity. But sometimes, a jewel is set aside for reasons that are far less visible. A very similar quiet rejection happened in the British royal vaults, though on a much grander scale and involving stones of massive proportions. In 1942, Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, received an exciting inheritance from the society hostess Dame Margaret Greville. The Queen wrote to Queen Mary at the time, noting that Mrs. Greville had left her jewels, "with her loving thoughts, dear old thing," and expressing excitement about seeing the stones once the lawyers finished their work. A black trunk eventually arrived containing an extensive collection, including a piece created by Boucheron in 1919. It was the Greville Emerald Kokoshnik tiara, modeled on the style popularized in the Russian imperial court. It was composed of diamonds set in platinum, with 6 emeralds on either side, and a massive 93.70-carat cabochon emerald at its very center. The Queen Mother enthusiastically integrated many of Mrs. Greville's jewels into her regular wardrobe, but for some reason, she completely bypassed this emerald kokoshnik. It remained untouched. Which is perhaps the most curious part, because nothing about this tiara made it difficult to wear, except the fact that it was never truly chosen. When Queen Elizabeth II inherited the collection in 2002, the tiara continued its quiet existence in the dark. The late Queen perhaps felt no need for it, as she already frequently wore the Grand Vladimir tiara with its interchangeable Cambridge emerald drops. For nearly 80 years, a tiara featuring an almost 100-carat emerald was completely hidden from the world. The piece finally broke its 80-year silence in 2018. Princess Eugenie borrowed it for her wedding to Jack Brooksbank at St. George's Chapel. Paired with her Peter Pilato gown and diamond and emerald drop earrings that were a wedding gift from the groom, the tiara was an absolute sensation. It was a striking choice for a younger royal bride looking to wear a historically rooted piece that had zero visual association with any living royal. After the wedding exhibition at Windsor Castle, it seemed the kokoshnik might retreat to the vault for another long rest. But in November 2025, Queen Camilla made a highly unexpected styling choice. For the annual diplomatic reception at Windsor Castle, she arrived wearing the Greville Emerald Kokoshnik. She paired it with her modern diamond earrings, Queen Victoria's diamond bar brooch, and the Van Cleef & Arpels serpent necklace inherited from her own grandmother. Seeing a queen consort elevate this long-forgotten piece for the main ambassadorial social event of the year shifts its status entirely. It is a gentle reminder that a jewel does not always need an alteration or a specific occasion to be worn. Sometimes it just has to wait for a woman whose personal style naturally aligns with its design. And then, there are cases where the decision has nothing to do with taste at all, where a jewel remains unworn not because it doesn't fit, but because it belongs, in a very real sense, to someone else. Consider the circlet. Prince Albert designed it in 1853 for Queen Victoria, taking inspiration from the Mughal arches and lotus flowers he saw at the Great Exhibition in London. Queen Victoria explicitly designated it as an heirloom of the crown in her will, meaning it was legally intended to pass directly from queen to queen. Her immediate successors handled the piece quite differently. Queen Alexandra disliked opals, considering them unlucky, so she had the original stones replaced with Burmese rubies. She never actually appeared in the altered tiara in public. Queen Mary ignored the piece entirely. The circlet finally found a true champion in 1937, when it was brought out for Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother. She made it a staple of her wardrobe, wearing it constantly on royal tours, to film premieres, and to state openings. When King George VI died in 1952, the legal status of the tiara dictated that it should pass immediately to the new monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen Mother simply kept it. She continued to wear the Oriental circlet, along with its coordinating ruby suite, for another 50 years of her widowhood. The young Queen Elizabeth II handled this situation with remarkable restraint. Because her mother retained the crown rubies, the Queen was left without a major ruby tiara in her working collection. She eventually had to commission an entirely new piece, the Burmese ruby tiara, to fill that specific gap. When asked about the retained crown heirlooms, the Queen reportedly said, "Mummy will give them back." She waited half a century, and by the time she finally wore it, the meaning of that decision had completely changed. Elizabeth II finally wore the Oriental circlet only once, during a state banquet in Malta in 2005, well after her mother's passing. She never wore it again. After that single appearance in Malta, the tiara retreated into the shadows once more. It seemed the piece was permanently retired, perhaps too closely associated with the Queen Mother's enduring image. Then, in December 2025, it made a stunning return. The Princess of Wales wore the Oriental circlet for the German state banquet at Windsor Castle. Bringing such a significant piece out of the vault is never just a matter of opening a safe and picking a favorite. It is a carefully approved, strategic decision. On one hand, it was a subtle nod to Prince Albert and the family's German heritage. More importantly, it felt like a very clear signal. Catherine is the future queen consort, and this specific tiara perfectly underscores that future status, drawing a direct parallel with the queen consort who made it her signature, the Queen Mother. It shows how a long-dormant jewel is reintroduced only when the wearer's status and the historical moment perfectly align. And sometimes, even that moment never comes. Seeing the Princess of Wales confidently revive a piece with such heavy historical weight naturally leads to discussions about another famous jewel. There is one specific necklace that is frequently mentioned as a perfect candidate for her to wear, yet it seems to have vanished entirely. The piece in question is the 7-strand pearl choker, featuring a large oval sapphire and diamond clasp. The Queen Mother originally gave the duck egg-sized sapphire cluster to Lady Diana Spencer as a wedding present in 1981. Some accounts suggest the sapphire might even have a Romanov provenance, noting its similarity to a brooch listed in the 1929 inventory of the Russian imperial jewels. Diana, Princess of Wales, initially wore the piece as a traditional brooch, famously pinning it to her dress during the Dutch state visit in 1982. Soon after, she had the sapphire converted into the centerpiece of a substantial pearl choker. It became one of her definitive signature pieces. She wore it to dance with John Travolta at the White House in 1985, and she chose it for the Serpentine Gallery Gala in 1994, wearing it alongside the famous off-the-shoulder dress on the night the Prince of Wales confessed to adultery on national television. She continued to wear the choker even after her divorce, right up until her appearance at the Met Gala in New York in December 1996. Since that night, the choker has never been seen in public or even exhibited. It now belongs to Prince William and Prince Harry. Aesthetically, the tight, multi-strand pearl design would look entirely appropriate today. The decision to leave it in the vault stems from the sheer weight of its recent history. The choker is intrinsically fused with the personal narrative and the public struggles of Diana, Princess of Wales. Keeping the piece in the vault shows an awareness of its heavy historical presence. For this sapphire, the time for a public revival simply has not yet arrived. Sometimes the reason a jewel stays hidden has nothing to do with solemn memory or changing fashions. Occasionally, it sits at the center of a very public family dispute. The King Edward VII ruby tiara carries a remarkably tangled ownership history within the Swedish royal family. The diamond and ruby piece arrived in Sweden in 1905 as a wedding gift from the British King and Queen to their niece, Princess Margaret of Connaught. When Margaret passed away, her second son, Prince Sigvard, inherited the tiara. In 1934, Sigvard married a commoner, which resulted in the loss of his princely title and his formal position within the royal house. Decades later, in the late 1960s, Sigvard handed the ruby tiara over to his father, King Gustav VI Adolf, in exchange for some funds. Sigvard operated under the belief that he was simply using the tiara as collateral and would eventually get it back. The king disagreed, viewing the transaction as a permanent sale. The situation fractured entirely when the king died in 1973. Rather than returning the tiara to Sigvard, the late king bypassed him completely and bequeathed the jewel to Sigvard's own son, Count Michael. The tension escalated even further a few years later when Michael sold the heirloom directly to his cousin, the current king, Carl XVI Gustav. The transaction brought the tiara securely back into the main royal vault, and Queen Sylvia began to incorporate the rubies into her wardrobe. She first wore the piece as a necklace during a state visit in 1987. The unresolved family tension surrounding the jewel soon spilled into the open. During the 1995 wedding of Prince Joachim of Denmark, Queen Sylvia attended wearing the tiara in its full form. Seeing the piece on the queen prompted Sigvard to publicly express his resentment and reiterate his claim to the jewel. Wearing a tiara while a living relative actively disputes the ownership creates a rather awkward dynamic for a queen consort. Following this public fuss, Sylvia simply put the tiara away. The piece disappeared from her rotation for years. She chose to wait until after Sigvard passed away in 2002 before quietly bringing it back. By the late 2000s, the King Edward VII ruby tiara finally became a regular fixture in Queen Sylvia's appearances, and it was recently worn by Princess Madeleine at the 2025 Icelandic state banquet. So far, these choices have been shaped by memory, family, and personal restraint. But some jewels carry a weight that goes far beyond the family itself. The most complex layer of the royal vaults involves pieces that remain hidden, not because of changing fashions or internal family disagreements, but because of the immense geopolitical weight they carry. Some jewels carry the physical marks of empire, making their public display a highly sensitive matter. A prime example is the Timor ruby. It arrived in British hands in 1849, acquired by the British East India Company from Duleep Singh. Despite its name, it was identified in 1851 as a large spinel rather than a true ruby. Queen Victoria had the stone set into a necklace, yet it is rarely discussed and never worn today. If you look closely at the physical surface of this specific stone, you will see exactly why. The faces of the spinel are directly engraved with the names of its previous Indian and Persian owners, including the Mughal Emperor Jahangir and the Persian king Nadir Shah. Reading the stone itself is like reading a ledger of shifting empires and conquests. Wearing a piece with such an explicit, carved history of colonial acquisition would invite immediate political scrutiny, which explains why the royal family keeps this theoretically wearable necklace safely out of sight. Occasionally, a diplomatic gift with no bloody history at all meets the exact same fate of permanent storage. During her 1954 Commonwealth tour, Queen Elizabeth II received a spectacular gift from the government of South Australia, the Andamuka opal necklace and matching earrings, featuring a central stone weighing an extraordinary 203 carats. It is widely regarded as the finest opal ever found. Yet, Queen Elizabeth II wore the necklace exactly once in public, very shortly after receiving it. I would absolutely love to see this necklace and earrings brought out today, though if we are being completely honest, styling a massive 203-carat opal is a task with an asterisk. A colored stone of that tremendous magnitude can easily overpower almost any gown. Whether it was simply too difficult to wear or treated as a rare state relic, it quietly became one of the least seen treasures in the entire collection. This brings us to the ultimate geopolitical jewel, the Koh-i-Noor. Its history is incredibly heavy. In 1849, the diamond came into British hands after being ceded under a treaty by an 11-year-old Indian prince, and its acquisition has been shadowed by controversy ever since. There is a famous old legend that the stone brings misfortune to any male ruler who wears it, which is why, throughout its time in Britain, it has only ever been placed in the crowns of queens and consorts. But today, the real danger of the Koh-i-Noor has nothing to do with ancient curses. It is entirely about modern diplomacy. The diamond has become a profound symbol of colonial history, with governments in India and Pakistan repeatedly demanding its return. The tension surrounding this single gemstone reached a critical point leading up to the coronation of King Charles III in 2023. Queen Camilla made a quiet, definitive styling choice to sidestep a potential diplomatic incident. She completely avoided using the Queen Mother's 1937 coronation crown, which permanently houses the Koh-i-Noor. She selected Queen Mary's crown instead, having it specifically reset with Cullinan diamonds that the late Queen Elizabeth II frequently wore as brooches. The royal family essentially averted a major international scandal simply by leaving their most famous diamond inside the Tower of London. Opening these royal jewelry boxes reveals far more than an assortment of diamonds and rubies. We are actually looking at a quiet record of diplomacy, careful tact, and deep respect for mothers and mothers-in-law, alongside the lingering echoes of vast historical dramas. It is easy to assume that women with access to such limitless collections can simply wear whatever they please on any given day. The way they actually manage these pieces shows a completely different reality. Their most significant decisions often revolve around what they consciously choose to leave behind in the vault. They bypass certain tiaras and necklaces for reasons far beyond a lack of formal occasions. They make a deliberate choice to abstain, leaving pieces untouched to avoid causing personal offense, to sidestep a geopolitical provocation, or simply to respect a painful family memory. If you enjoyed this journey through the closed royal safes, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you never miss our next conversation. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing this time with me. The jewels themselves might rest in the dark and remain perfectly silent. Their stories, however, have a life of their own, and they will not fade away as long as we keep sharing them. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.